Performance coaches and the lead physiological testing, or the physiological testing lead here at GoPerform. So as you can see on the board here, I'm going to be talking about optimizing your training for performance through better understanding your own physiology, okay? So we're going to cover a few different things. We're going to look at metabolism and energy systems, your VO2 max, a lactate threshold, and training zones. Okay, so to start us off here with metabolism, if anyone's done biology or PE at some point at school, you've probably covered these concepts quite broadly. I'm going to go over them very briefly and in quite a simple way, just to give a bit of context to everything else I'm going to talk about. So it's pretty obvious when we exercise, we need energy. Our muscles need energy to function, and they get this through metabolism. And metabolism is basically the breakdown of stuff to produce that energy. And you can break down carbohydrates, fats, proteins, or lactate. That is the stuff that your body breaks down to produce energy to allow movement to occur. So there are two main energy systems that your body uses to do this. Two main ones that I'm going to talk about. And I'm breaking it down into these two. You've got aerobic and anaerobic. So aerobic mostly uses fats and carbohydrates, whereas anaerobic mostly uses carbohydrates. Can you guys see if I'm standing here? I don't want to keep standing either way. So understanding how these two energy systems function and how they kind of function in the body is important, because you can actually target each of them and identify each of them and identify which ones are maybe more of a weakness in your running performance. So a lot of you have probably seen this after a session. If anyone has a Garmin, you see this come up at the end of your session. It tells you how much of an impact you've had on either your aerobic or your anaerobic systems. So it's a really nice feature within Garmin. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you don't know what they are, but hopefully this will help you understand that a little bit more. So an example here, if that was after a run, that probably would have been a nice long, easy run. It's a larger number there on the aerobic side, so a longer run is going to have a better impact on your aerobic energy system. So quickly just looking at the aerobic energy system, as I said, we're mostly using carbohydrates in the form of glucose and fats, but to use those fats we need some oxygen, okay? And the main result of this is a lot of energy, okay, a lot of energy. But so that means it allows us to do the activity we're doing for a long duration. It doesn't fatigue us, so that's partly what's good about this system, but it needs oxygen. So for you to use this system to its full potential, you need a lot of oxygen. But it's also quite slow. It's slow at producing energy, which is why you can only use this system when you're exercising at a low intensity. Whereas the anaerobic energy system, this is a little bit different. It doesn't use fats, partly because you don't have access to the oxygen you need for it, but it does just use carbohydrates, and that results in energy. That's the purpose of these systems, they result in energy. But it does produce some lactate and hydrogen ions, and we're going to talk about those in a moment. So, again, mentioned here, it doesn't need oxygen. It produces energy very quickly, which makes it really good for when you're exercising at a high intensity. It produces lactate, which I've put as a good thing here, and we'll get onto this in a moment. And it causes fatigue. That's the kind of negative effect of this system. And it only uses carbs, so there's a limited supply of that. There's a limited supply of that glycogen in your muscle and glucose in the blood, which means you can only really use this for a short period of time, because you've only got a limited supply of that within your body. And not much energy, so as I said, only usable for a short period. So on to lactate, or whatever you call it. You might call it lactic acid, you might call it lactic, you might call it lactate, it doesn't matter. It's not the bad guy, okay? Everyone's thought about it for years as being the cause of that muscle soreness and that burn that you get when you run really hard. It's not the cause, it is just a byproduct. So it's produced during anaerobic breakdown of glucose. So aerobically, your body breaks down carbohydrates, it doesn't produce lactate. When you break it down without much oxygen, anaerobically, you do produce some lactate, okay? But the main thing we're looking at here is another thing. So those little blue things in the corner, that is hydrogen. Hydrogen ions are also released at the same time when you break down that glucose anaerobically. And that is what creates that acidity within the cell. But lactate is actually quite useful. It's a fuel. So when you're exercising at a low intensity, or if you slow yourself down, lactate can be used as a fuel. It's sent to other systems and other tissues within the body to be used as a fuel, just like carbohydrates and fats are. So lactate does not cause that soreness or fatigue. It's just something that we refer to and measure in order to determine and measure that level of metabolic stress that your body is experiencing when you're working very hard. And we're still always going to refer to it as like, oh, the lactic at the end of a session. You'll still talk about it like that, but it's important to understand that is not the cause of that thing you're feeling. So back onto energy systems again here, we're going to look at the energy continuum. So it's really important to understand that both systems are being used at all times. You're never always using one or the other. It's a continuum. So depending on how hard you're working, so depending on the intensity, depending on your fitness level, and depending on how long you're exercising for, that will determine which system you're using more of. But you're always using a little bit of both. So an example here, you've got about 90% contribution aerobic and a 10% contribution anaerobic. That's probably a long, steady, easy run, okay? You're using both, but your body is preferring to use aerobic because it produces a lot of energy. So it's the preferred system to use. Could be 50-50, that's probably more of a tempo type run. Your body's using quite a lot of aerobic, but not kind of an equal amount of anaerobic. And then the opposite here, so you're working really hard. This is a harder threshold. This is a fast session. Your body's using a lot of anaerobic and a little bit of aerobic. So they're still always in use, but the kind of distribution of which changes depending on how hard you're working. Okay, that's metabolism. Moving on to VO2 max. So this can be thought of as your aerobic ceiling. So it's essentially your kind of fitness potential in a way. And it's defined as the volume or the maximum volume of oxygen that you can utilize during maximal intensity exercise. So when you're working your very hardest, how much oxygen your body can take in and utilize in aerobic metabolism, that is your VO2 max. It's measured in milliliters per kilogram per minute, so it's relative to body weight, so you can compare numbers across individuals because it's a relative score. And it's made up of quite a lot of things. It's made up of how well your body takes in oxygen, so how well you can breathe air in, how well your lungs then transfer that air across into the bloodstream, how well your heart then pumps that blood around the body, and then how well the muscles kind of extract that oxygenated blood, oxygen from the blood to use within respiration or metabolism. So there's quite a lot going on, but the score that we look at is VO2 max. And so how do we measure it? So here at GoPerform, we do it wearing a mask. This is the main way that you would measure your VO2 max. We start someone off at a steady intensity and then gradually build them up over time to a maximal intensity until they're completely fatigued, essentially. So we need to take someone up to their maximal level of exertion. You could also use the estimate that Garmin gives you. That is actually a reasonable measure. It's about 10% above or below your true value. And the more data you give your Garmin, the better that estimation is. So it's not a terrible estimation at all. But does VO2 max matter? Yes and no, it does. It does matter, but it doesn't matter. So a higher VO2 max means that you have a higher ceiling for performance. Your potential is a little bit greater. And it represents a greater aerobic capacity. So if you can take in more oxygen and you can use more oxygen, you have a higher potential to be fitter, essentially. It's also linked to longevity. So having a higher VO2 max can have a very large effect on reducing your disease risk, sorry. But it's not the only important variable, it's not the most important variable, sorry, in determining performance. Because two athletes could have the exact same VO2 max but perform very differently in a race. So two people with the same VO2 max might run very differently. They might have completely different events, but it's a piece of the puzzle, a small piece. Okay, so what is I put a good and then I realized these are very good, so I thought I had to change it. Because these people are incredibly fit. I also noticed they're all doing that, that's new. Okay, so we've got this guy on the left, Killian. He has a VO2 max of 89.5. Paula Radcliffe has a VO2 max, had a VO2 max of 75. These guys probably are a little less fit now. Lance Armstrong had a VO2 max of 86 and Eliud Kipchoge 84. So they're staggering numbers. This is kind of the top end of the scale. If anyone knows kind of what these numbers are and you've seen it on your Garmin or whatever system you use, I assume you all use something. These are really big numbers, really big. So looking at normal people. So for normal people, people who don't do a whole lot, their VO2 max is probably in the 30s and 40s, it's quite low. Casual exercises, 40s and 50s. Recreational people, about 50 to 60. Fit amateurs, around 60 to 70. And then nearly 70 plus, okay? So it goes from all the way up, down from like 20 to 30, all the way up to 70 plus. So it's a big range. And there are some key factors that can influence your VO2 max. So other than just training a lot and improving your performance and your VO2 max, that way by training, there are some other factors. So your age. After the age of 30, your VO2 max declines by about 1% every year for the rest of your life. Not a great thing to know, but if you do train, you can probably offset that slightly. And 1% is a small number. If you start high, it's not going to be a big change, so start high. Biological sex is another one, so if you're female, you're generally, on average, slightly smaller, so VO2 max is slightly lower in women than it is in men. And genetics always plays a role. So anything performance-related, genetics will play quite a big role in that. So if you have a low VO2 max or a high VO2 max, talk to your parents. Okay, so how do you improve VO2 max if you want to improve VO2 max? These are a few methods. So high intensity intervals. So it's important to realize that VO2 max is high intensity. If you were to do a VO2 max session, or if we were to measure your VO2 max, we measure that value when you are working your very hardest. So a way to improve that is to work very hard, quite a lot. So you could do intervals. Do intervals is an example of 4 lots of 4 minutes. Zone 5, that's the top end of the zones that I'll talk about later. That's one method. Another method is base building. So it will often make up the majority of your training. That steady zone 2 running of between 30 and 90 minutes. That is a really good way to improve VO2 max as well. Even though I just said you have to work hard, you do a little bit of both. And strength training, Tristan mentioned it earlier brilliantly. So between 1 to 2 sessions or more a week is a really good way of improving your efficiency when you run, which can have a huge benefit on your VO2 max. And it's important to know if you're very fit, so the fitter you are, the less of an effect you can have on your VO2 max. It's a kind of a matter of diminishing returns. So the fitter you get, the less benefit you get from this type of training on your VO2 max. But it's likely that if you're very fit already, it's not something you need to focus on in terms of improving. There are other things that you can work on, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, VO2 max done. Lactate threshold. Okay, so I would say that this is the main limiter of performance. And I call it a key to training more optimally. Because if you understand it and you utilize it, you can really make some big changes to your training. So I would define it as the point at which lactate begins to accumulate faster than it can be recycled. Recycled as in your body uses it. Your body uses lactate as a fuel. Your body shuttles it to other tissues, other muscles, and it uses it or it stores it. That's what I mean by recycled, okay? So it has a lot of names, lactate threshold. It's called all of these things that are popping up on the TV here. It makes it very confusing. I still get confused about it quite a lot because of all these names. Everybody calls it by something different. They generally mean kind of the same thing, but because there are so many definitions and so many names, it makes it a real minefield to try and understand and learn. Here at GoPerform and in quite a lot of other big centres around the country and other places, they will define it in 2 ways. You've got LT1, or lactate threshold 1, and LT2, lactate threshold 2. Because there are 2 thresholds that we'll talk about. Okay, how do we measure lactate threshold? So there are some good options out there that you can do. One is the Garmin estimation. I keep mentioning Garmin here. I'm not sponsored by Garmin. I just assume most people use Garmin. Put your hand up. Who uses a Garmin? Okay, fine. Well, that was more than I actually thought. Brilliant, fine. So when you've done a pretty hard session or a few sessions, you know it pops up with that all new lactate threshold identified. Do you want to accept? Yeah, everyone's seen that? Give me some nods. Yeah, good. I've had that a few times. So it's okay. If you give it quite a bit of data, it's relatively accurate. It's not bad. It's not the most accurate, but it's okay. It's something. But it only gives you your LT2. Or in Garmin's terms, it's probably somewhere between LT1 and LT2. And again, we'll touch that in a moment. There's a 30-minute run test you can do as well. That is, again, free to do. Again, if you have a Garmin, which isn't free, it has an option on there for you to do that test. You essentially run for 30 minutes. You need to click twice. You need a heart rate monitor, a chest strap ideally, rather than the one on your wrist. And you measure your heart rate for the whole 30 minutes, but you average it for those last 10 minutes. So your average heart rate for the final 10 minutes of a 30-minute, pretty much all-out run would be your lactate threshold heart rate. It's a little bit more accurate. It requires quite a hard effort on your own normally, but it's free. So it's quite a good option. And then the final option here is the lab test or proper lactate threshold test that you would do either at a university here, we do them here, or if you have your own kit, you can do them at home. Now this is the kind of the best option. It's the most precise, most accurate, and identifies both your LT1 and your LT2, which are two quite important thresholds that are good to understand and good to be able to get a measure of. And how often would you retest? So it's often a question I get when people come to do the test with us. They say, when should I next do it? How often should I do this? You can probably get away with doing one every 9 to 12 months. But if you think about it, when your performance changes, physiologically you're getting better. Physiologically you're getting fitter, you're getting faster. If you're using the same thresholds, it's not going to, and you're using that for your training, you're not optimal. You're not training at the optimal level. So re-identifying those thresholds is quite important because we'll use them to determine training zones, which we use for training. Anyway, so the test that we do here, we call it an incremental step test. This is how we identify the lactate threshold. So on this graph here, we've got intensity on the y-axis there, which obviously in kilometers an hour for running, and then time on the x. So this is what I mean by a step. So we do 3 to 5 minute stages, and we increase your intensity by about 0.5 to 1 kilometer an hour every stage. And then at the end of every stage, we take a measure of blood lactate and heart rate, okay? And then we do that up until we're happy that the second threshold has been reached. We might sometimes go a little bit further just to be extra sure that we've reached that threshold, but that'll take us all the way up to close to exhaustion. Right, and what would the result of that look like? So following a test, what do you get? What does it look like? A little bit like this. So this is what we call a lactate profile. And this is something we put together following a test. All it is heart rate and lactate on a graph against speed. So as we increase the intensity here, as we increase the speed, each of these are the measurement points at the end of each stage. This is your lactate, this is your heart rate. So heart rate here, lactate there. Obviously both increase relatively linearly throughout the test because the test is getting harder. And we'll go into detail on this in a moment. All right, and then from that we identify your LT1 and your LT2. Okay, we're gonna have a little walkthrough of the result. So, if we were looking at this and this was someone's lactate profile, these first few stages, you can see the lactate doesn't change very much. It's low, it stays very steady. There's a very slight increase, but not much, it's quite small. The heart rate goes up quite a bit, but that's all right. Basically, this is easy. This is kind of your easy running. The lactate stays low. Think long run, Sunday run, recovery run. You can kind of manage that all day. It's really comfortable. It's aerobic, okay? You can manage it for a long time. And then we increase the intensity a little bit more. Lactate starts to creep up a little bit more. Heart rate continues to rise as well. This is kind of your easy-ish, moderate type intensity. As I said, I think tempo, kind of half marathon pace, that's kind of where you'd be there at that level of lactate. And then we keep going up. So we go 16, 17, 18 kilometers an hour. We've made it faster here. The lactate's really shot up, so it's really increased. The heart rate's increased a little bit, but the lactate has just exploded. This is hard, so this is your hard running. This is your session. This is the kind of top end or bottom end, sorry, of 10K pace or 5K pace. And that threshold we looked at a moment ago, so this is where we would look at LT1 to kind of be. This marks the first slight rise in lactate. So between 10 and 14, there's not a real big difference in lactate, but then between 14 and 15, it jumps up a little bit. So it's the first initial rise in lactate concentration that we measure. And then that second one is kind of the second rise, but the second big rise. So there's a big jump, but lactate then starts to rise exponentially. So that then identifies that second threshold. And why are these important? So I hope I haven't lost you with that. So the lactate thresholds are really important because I would say they're probably one of the best predictors of performance out there. And I'm just going to show this example here. So this is a lactate profile of Paula Radcliffe in 2003, I think a few weeks before she broke the world record at London. So you can see it's pretty much the same graph as what I showed you before. This isn't my data, we didn't do her test here, I wish we did. It didn't even open in 2003. Anyway, so you see that LT there? So that you see what I mean, they call them different things. You've got LT and LTP. For the sake of this, it's LT1 and LT2. It's the same thing. Roughly the kind of speed there at LT, can you see that, Robbie? What's that?
18.5.
18.5. Guess what she ran her marathon at?
18.5.
18.5, well, 18.65, but close. Yeah, exactly. So that is kind of the speed that she can maintain for the length of time she ran the marathon. If she went faster, she would have had to slow down. So it was almost, that was her threshold pace for marathon, so the first threshold. So really, really interesting that it was pretty much exactly the same as a test that she'd done a few weeks prior. Okay, it also allows accurate calculation of training zones, and this is what we're going to talk about in a moment, so I'm just going to brush over there. It can show changes in performance over time. So if we look here at these three lactate profiles, the further right and down the line is, the better. So it means that this lighter green line in season 3, the kind of third season of them training and performing, they can maintain a higher speed at a lower perceived effort or a lower lactate concentration. So they would outperform this person, they would outperform this person. So the further right it is, the better. Okay, so how would you improve your lactate threshold? By improving your lactate threshold, you're essentially delaying and reducing the production of lactate. You're improving your body's ability to use lactate. You're improving your body's ability to mop up the hydrogen ions that are also released, which is the main thing we're worried about because that's what causes that fatigue. That is essentially what it means to improve your threshold. But we can look at it in quite an individual way, where you can improve either your LT1 or your LT2. And for some people, they need to improve one or the other. And we'll just go over that here. So to improve your LT1, you would do a lot of base building, a lot of slow, steady zone 2 running. Okay, that's how you would improve that. And it was essentially improving the body's ability to work aerobically. So you're going to increase your number of mitochondria, you'll improve blood flow to the muscle, you'll improve increase the recruitment of those type 1 muscle fibers, which are the ones that you use when you're running relatively slowly. You'll be better at using lactate as a fuel. Okay. Just moving on to LT2, so if you needed to improve your LT2, so I'm probably an example of this in that I do most of my training at very low intensity. When I run, I don't like going fast because it's hard. So my LT2 is probably really close to my LT1 because I don't do enough hard training. I don't do enough sessions because they're horrible. I don't like them. So if I wanted to improve that, I probably want to do some more tempo and threshold type runs. So these are the kind of 4 by 5 minute LT2 pace. It's quite a simple one. It could be 3 minutes, 4 minutes. And that's the kind of session that you do there. Or intervals, so cruise intervals, about 1 kilometer, 6 by K at 10K pace. Again, just another example. This is going to improve the muscle's ability to work anaerobically. So that's going to make you better at clearing lactate. It's going to make you better at buffering lactate and delaying its accumulation. And it's going to make you a bit more efficient at producing energy anaerobically. Okay, over time, as expected. I'm going to have to cut out there. Training zones was my last bit. If anyone wants to learn a bit more about training zones and how we use the lactate threshold to determine training zones, come and have a talk to me at the end. I can show you the last few slides.
Unless you want to summarize in 1 minute, Johnny.
1 minute, I'll get 1 minute. Okay, fantastic. Right, 1 minute, this is perfect. I've got a great slide for it. Okay, so back to this profile. I'm just going to click through here real quick. This is how we would define your training zones based on your lactate profile. So your zone 1, easy recovery, slow, steady running, is up to LT1. Zone 2, which is where you would do the majority of your training, is probably the most important zone, is kind of between LT1 and kind of halfway between the 2 thresholds there. Zone 3, which is probably where most people end up doing a lot of their running because it feels quite fast, it feels fun, but it's not the most effective. It's almost too fast to get the benefits from zone 2, but it's too slow to get the benefits from zone 4. So it's a bit of a dead space. Zone 4 there, just across the second threshold, that's your zone 4, and then zone 5 is your much faster harder type session. If you need to work on speed, that'd be the zone that you'd use. And just a real quick final summary here. If you were to use max heart rate as your zone, so a percentage of your max, if I was to just extrapolate that and kind of superimpose it onto the same profile, you see how it kind of massively underestimates each of those zones. So the difference there is quite big. So that's how we would define them using your thresholds. If you were to do the same thing for the same max heart rate, it would look a little bit like that. So it underestimates kind of how hard you're able to work at each intensity, I guess. Anyway, I'm going to have to finish there, guys. If anyone wants to talk more about zones like VO2 max or lactate threshold, I will be here at the end. Thank you.